I can still clearly recall the first time I shook Brandon Mercer's hand. It was cool and smooth. And his hold conveyed that he prioritized efficiency over interpersonal relationships. I had no idea at the time how that handshake would end up costing a young man his arm and almost destroying everything I had worked so hard to achieve. Martin Gallagher is my name. At the age of 58, Maple Forge Steel in Hamilton, Ontario has been my second home for the last 35 years. As a night shift youth with more muscle than sense, I began working here at the age of 19, where I learned the rhythm of sweat and steel. I rose from the factory floor to the position of plant operations manager throughout the years. Overseeing 300 employees, dozens of machines, and a safety record, I was really pleased of. Safety wasn't just a figure on a quarterly report to me, it was intimate. It made the difference between watching paramedics wheel someone away at the end of the day or seeing my team clock out. The board referred to Brandon as a savior upon his arrival. Well-groomed shoes, sharp suits, and Toronto-based big city credentials. He was the type of CEO who walked around the plant with a tablet in hand, tapping notes while stepping over oil stains that ought to have been marked and clean, and who called individuals champ without knowing their names. Outside the boardroom, the handshake took place. I held out my hand and introduced myself as Martin Gallagher. Brandon Mercer, he said with a self-assured smile, I'm excited to streamline this place. Simplifying my throat was locked with the word. It didn't take long for things to start changing. Brandon circulated letters about increasing output, postponed safety drills, and referred to maintenance shutdowns as inefficient. On a Monday morning, I received the first warning email, quarterly safety training suspended until further notice. I headed directly to his office. There is a single frame phrase about innovation on the wall glass walls and simple decor. Brandon was scrolling through emails while seated behind his modern workstation. I said, maintaining a calm tone, Brandon, we can't just cut safety training. He smiled as though I had told him a charming tale as he glanced up for a moment. Martin, are you aware of the cost of a day's missed output? Next quarter, we will make up for it. I tightened my jaw. Quarters don't matter to accidents. Brandon's smile remained unwavering. Thank you for your enthusiasm. However, Martin, the world is changing. We must go more quickly. A knot in my stomach tightened as I walked out of his office. Our shrewd, no-nonsense finance lead. Emily Chen looked up with a glimmer of worry in her eyes as I passed her desk. She simply said I saw what was coming without saying anything. The machine shouted out on the floor, an old friend and head of maintenance. Robert McAllister reclined against a beam with his arms folded. As Brandon walked by reeling off numbers to his helper, Robert whispered, he's not like the others. No, I sighed, he is worse. Elaine welcomed me home that evening with a mug of tea and a kind kiss. Long day, she inquired. I smiled at her wearily. That's something you could say. The faces on the work floor, the apprentices, the veterans. The families behind every set of hands came to mind as I lay in bed that night. I reflected about the handshake, the memo, and the cold that had been seeping into my bones ever since. As the sun rose over Hamilton's skyline the following morning, I entered Maple Forge feeling burdened. Robert gave me a little back pat as Emily walked past with a slight nod. Even though no one spoke it aloud, they saw it too. Emily gave me a worrisome look as I left Brandon's office later that afternoon. Following yet another pointless dispute about the delayed repair schedule, I realized I would be waging this war mostly by myself. 2 weeks later, a loose safety barrier on one of the main presses caused the first near miss. Years ago, this type of issue would have triggered alarms, prompted maintenance, and stopped the line until it was addressed. However, it was dismissed as non-critical under the new administration of Brandon Mercer. Robert McAllister pulled me away as I was moving across the floor, his expression tense. The guard on line 3, Martin, is rattling wildly. Even after 2 patches, it isn't holding. The steady thud of steel on steel filled the air as we walked over together. With each impact, the machine's side shield vibrated, the bolts barely holding. My chest constricted. We shut it down, I firmly stated. Robert gave me a familiar look, one of fear mixed with agreement. Brandon has been critical of our downtime. Are you certain you want to pull it right away? I waved to the shift supervisor and said, I'm not asking for permission. However, Brandon and his aide emerged on the floor before we could take any action. In contrast to the crew's bulky boots, his dress shoes shone on the concrete. Despite having razor-sharp eyes, he smiled. Martin, he called over saying, I love the initiative. However, why are we talking about closing line 3? I calmly explained, highlighting the risk, the vibration, and the possibility of severe harm. Brandon grinned and gave me a shoulder clap. You're heard. However, Martin, we're hitting all-time highs this month. We must avoid overreacting. During the night shift, maintenance can inspect it. I opened my lips, but Brandon was already leaving, waving at the welders like a celebrity at a charity function, and his aide was already taking notes. I looked across at Robert. We recorded. I stated. I wrote an email to Brandon that evening, copying Emily and the shift leaders. I explained the problem in detail, provided examples of previous near misses, and outlined the repercussions of ignoring it. In a few minutes, Emily responded, I got it. Martin, keep going. The following morning, Liam O'Connor stumbled beside me as I entered the facility. One of our newest hires, Liam, was a brilliant young man with a bright future. He was energetic, young, and usually smiling. He said, Hey, Martin, are they really missing the upcoming training sessions? My heart fell. Who informed you of that? Brandon will learn it on the job, he said. In the center of the path, I came to a stop. Listen carefully, Liam. Come to Robert or myself if you have any questions regarding anything on the line. No shortcuts. I could see the reluctance in his eyes, even though he nodded. Young employees were constantly trying to prove that they could take the pressure. Furthermore, Brandon's obsession with data further fueled the flames. The plant buzzed at full throttle by the afternoon. Forklifts sped by, welders ignited, and machines smashed. Tension throbbed beneath my skin as I moved across the floor. I observed the crew, the supervisors, and the control panels blinking warning lights. Over the PA system, Brandon's voice crackled. Well done, group. We're establishing the standard for the whole industry. Continue. My throat was filled with bile. It was cheerleading while the foundation crumbled beneath his feet, not leadership. I went to the control room to look at the logs as the sun began to set below the steel roofs. Operating diagnostics, Robert sat at the console. Her condition is deteriorating, he whispered. A complete strip down will be required shortly. I gave a sad nod. Will you stay up late to ensure that tonight doesn't go wrong? Robert smiled at me wearily. Don't I always? Emily crept in behind me as I made my way to my office. Silently, she shut the door. Martin, I'm worried. So am I said. However, Brandon is unable to control the board. After a moment of hesitation, Emily took a thin flash drive out of her bag. I've been keeping track of the ignored reports, repair requests, and budget cuts just in case. I gave her a startled look. Emily. She muttered, I don't like what's happening. You're not as isolated as you believe. I felt a glimmer of relief for the first time in weeks. On my way out that night, I stopped close to line 3. There was Liam smiling and using a rag to wipe his hands while chatting with an older coworker. The defective barrier shivered with each stroke as the press hissed and thudded. My stomach turned. I nearly turned around and yelled at him. However, the weight of a long day and the fatigue in my bones drew me in the direction of the door. As I entered the parking lot, the chilly air felt good against my face. There was a slight orange glow on the horizon after the sun had disappeared. I closed my eyes for a second and took a deep breath. My stomach turned with fear as I opened them again and saw Liam laughing and striding up to the defective press through the window. On a Friday, the type of day when you think, just get through one more shift, it happened. As usual, the mill was humming with the constant hum of machinery shaping steel. With a clipboard in hand, I was moving across the floor when I heard the sound that still echoes in my mind, the sudden, loud clang of metal hitting something it shouldn't, followed by a yell that broke through the cacophony of the presses. My throat tightened with my heart, with my feet banging on the concrete. I dashed for line 3, avoiding astonished employees who were still. A small group of people had already gathered at the press, their faces pallid and their palms clamped to their mouths. Take a back seat, make space for us. I pushed through and barked. And there he was, crumpled close to the base of the press. Liam O'Connor's left arm was twisted to an angle that no human arm should bend. His breath came in quick, ragged gasps, and his face was ghost white with perspiration trickling down his brow. Beneath him, blood gathered, creating a horrifying contrast with the gray concrete floor. Make an ambulance call. I knelt next to him and yelled. Robert's face was pale as he slid to a stop beside me. A tourniquet is urgently needed. I put my hand on Liam's shoulder and looked into his wide, Terrified eyes as Robert ripped off his belt and wrapped it around Liam's upper arm. Remain with me, child. Remain with me. The following several minutes were hazy, filled with emergency personnel, flashing lights, and the pungent, metallic smell of blood. Under the flash of red and blue, the paramedics hurried Liam out after swiftly hoisting him onto a stretcher. My heart pounded against my ribs as I stood motionless, my fists locked at my sides. I realized the hush that had descended upon the manufacturing floor as the ambulance doors slammed shut. Numerous others were watching me, including coworkers, managers, and even Brandon, who had emerged at the periphery of the group with a meticulously placed mask of worry on his face. His hands were in his pockets as he walked up. "Martin, terrible accident," he whispered. "Obviously, we'll have to make a statement." I resisted the need to grasp him by his immaculate collar as I gently turned to face him. "Brandon, that wasn't an accident. Both of us are aware of that." He tightened his smile. "Human error is tragic in every manner. Let's avoid adding insult to injury by placing blame." I inhaled deeply, steadily. "Line 3 is going to be shut down." He muttered, "You're no longer in a position to make that call." He then went on to say, "Effective immediately. Martin, we're terminating your employment in front of the assembled employees and managers. The paperwork will be handled by HR." The world shook momentarily on its axis. Emily emerged at the outside of the group, her eyes wide and her face pallid. With a look of rage in his eyes, Robert took a step forward, but I stopped him with a raised hand. "Not now, not here." There was no point. I turned and left, breathing sharply in my chest and taking hard steps. Cheryl from HR was waiting outside the entrance of my office, holding a manila packet to her chest. She spoke in a little pitying voice, but the words hardly made an impression. "Agreement for termination last, salary return of business assets." I packed my personal belongings, which included a chipped mug Liam had given me as a joke last Christmas and a framed picture of the old team from my first year as manager. Tracing the features of the men and women who had contributed their sweat and expertise to keep this institution operating, my fingertips lingered over the image. I was zipping my luggage when there was a faint knock on the door. Emily cautiously glanced toward the hallway as she slipped inside. She pressed a thin flash drive into my palm and murmured, "Here, this is what you'll want." I felt its weight in my hand as I gazed at it. "What is it?" "All of it," she whispered. Her tears glistened as she said, "Maintenance logs, ignored requests, budget cuts, all of it. They can't blame you for this, Martin." I felt something stirring inside of me for the first time that day. Not rage or despair, but resolve. I went out the rear door and entered the chilly Hamilton night. With the rest of the daylight disappearing behind the steel mill silhouette, the sky had taken on a bruised purple hue. The burden of the day fell like a lead cloak on my shoulders as I made my way to my pickup. My career was over. I had failed in my attempt to protect this plant. I had failed to prevent what was about to happen, and a child was laying in a hospital bed. However, I glanced down at the flash drive Emily had handed me as I sat in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel. Something sharper was now burning beneath my lined face and tired eyes as I looked back at my reflection in the glass. This was not the end of it. Emily put a flash disk into my hand while I was packing up my office. "Everything has changed by this." The flash drive weighed more than it ought to have, as though it were the result of all the risks we had all taken. That night, fingers locked around that tiny bit of plastic. I sat in my truck, the cab frigid despite the spring thaw moving into Hamilton. My thoughts were racing. Images flashed again behind my eyelids, showing Liam wide-eyed, gasping, his arm fractured and twisted. Emily's silent act of resistance gave me something I hadn't felt in weeks: a way forward, even though I hadn't been able to stop this. I had a plan. By Saturday a.m. first, I gave Robert McAllister a call. The second ring caught his attention. "Martin," he spoke in a strained, worn-out voice. "Come see me in an hour at the Gray Oak Cafe. Rob, bring everything you own." A popular hangout for seniors and shift workers. The Gray Oak was a tiny local area close to the industrial region. Emily was sitting at a table in the corner with her hands encircling a steaming cup when I got there. A few minutes later, Robert showed in with a battered folder full of printed maintenance logs and scribbled notes. As we got comfortable, Emily said, "I called in a favor. Another person is on their way." Over the door, the bell jingled with the poise of someone accustomed to crisis management. "Paul Dubois." A stocky man with salt and pepper hair and keen eyes slid into the booth. Lawyer for labor, Emily whispered, "He is good." I informed them of everything, including Brandon's deflection, the press, the disregarded warnings, and my dismissal. Paul nodded and listened intently, taking notes in a leather notebook. Eventually he remarked, "You have a case. However, internal emails and logs are not enough. We require an outside authority." Emily took a business card out of her bag once more. Tremblay Sophie, Inspector from the Ministry of Labor. For months she has been sniffing around Maple Forge silently. Leaning back, I allowed the weight to sink in. We weren't merely facing a man. We were taking on a system that was based on ignoring problems. On the table, Robert placed a tiny digital recorder. Last week I recorded Brandon's meeting with the maintenance crew. His jaw tensed as he urged us bluntly to make it work without making any repairs. I'm sick and tired of seeing guys like Liam suffer. We split up the work I would get in touch with. Sophie Emily would compile the financial trail. Robert would talk to the team and Paul would draft a formal complaint. Elaine sat next to me that night while I organized files in the quiet of my house. She gently stroked her hand down my arm. "Are you certain about this?" she inquired. I looked her in the eyes. "It hurts someone else if I go now. That is not acceptable to me." I saw the streetlights flicker on Sunday night while sitting in my truck outside the Ministry of Labor headquarters. I stepped out as Sophie Tremblay came out wrapped in a heavy coat. "Sophie," she hesitated, wary. "Yes. My name is Martin Gallagher. I oversaw Maple Forge's plant operations in the past." Her gaze became piercing. "Do you have a present for me?" I explained everything, the logs, the emails, the recordings, the accident over the course of the following hour at a nearby diner. She asked incisive, targeted inquiries while paying close attention. Finally, she stated, "We take whistleblower complaints seriously. However, you must realize that businesses such as Maple Forge are adept at hiding their activities. It won't be simple." I grinned glumly. There is never anything worthwhile to do. Sophie gave me a direct look as we concluded a formal inspection is required, but approval might take weeks. Continue to gather as much as you can in the meanwhile. My phone buzzed as I drove home. Emily. "CBC just phoned Martin. They learned of the mishap. They are looking for a response." I gripped the wheel more tightly. "For now, tell them no, but don't close the door." I was sitting at the kitchen table at home with papers all over me. Elaine kissed the top of my head and set a tea mug next to my elbow. "You're not by yourself," she said. My phone buzzed once more the following morning as I drew up outside Robert's house to get another set of paperwork. Emily's voice wavered on the other end of the call. CBC simply ran with it. Martin Internet first page. A steel plant scandal is exposed by a whistleblower. As the early sun peeked over the roofs, I relaxed in the driver's seat. I sensed a glimmer of hope for the first time since Liam's injury. "Whistleblower exposes steel plant scandal" was the headline on CBC's website the following morning. I never thought I would be called a saboteur and see my face on the nightly news. The CBC clip, which included footage of the Maple Forge steel sign, emergency cars outside the plant, a hazy picture of me from an old corporate event, and a blurry picture of Liam being taken into an ambulance aired repeatedly. It was elegantly framed by the voiceover. A management team under fire, a worker injured, and a whistleblower's warnings. The twist, however, was Brandon's public declaration. My jaw was clenched so tightly that it hurt while I watched it on the TV in my living room. Executives in dark suits encircled Brandon as he stood behind a podium. The mask of concern was fully in place, and his tone was silky. "The recent incident deeply saddens us," he stated. "We have reason to believe that intentional interference by a former employee may have contributed to the equipment failure. Even as we look into the underlying causes," I leaped to my feet. I murmured to myself, "You snake." The telephone rang. Emily was the one. "Did you see it, Martin?" "Yes, Sauter was a bang. A press conference is being called by Paul. We will not allow him to dictate the story." 2 hours later, I faced a line of reporters as I stood in front of a small chamber at a nearby union hall. Paul stood behind me, composed and authoritative. Emily was hovering close by her phone, beeping nonstop. Robert sat with his mouth clenched and his arms folded in the back. "We have here a detailed record of maintenance failures, budget cuts, and ignored safety warnings at Maple Forge Steel. Spanning the past year," Paul said, presenting a thick folder. With my heart pounding in my chest, I took a step forward. Weeks before to the accident, I voiced my worries regarding the publicity that hurt Liam O'Connor. These issues were disregarded, recorded, and then disregarded once more. This was carelessness, not sabotage. There were many questions. Mr. Gallagher, why now? Have you tampered with the apparatus? Why should we trust you more than the company's executives? I took a deep breath because I spent 35 years working there since I was dismissed for raising my voice. Additionally, a 23-year-old child lost his arm as management prioritized profits over humanity. Paul's phone buzzed while the reporter scrawled and the cameras clicked. He leaned closer after taking a quick look at the television. Sophie Tremblay recently received approval. They're entering today. The action that followed played out like a scene from a movie. Outside Maple Forge news vans gathered in a clump, their antennas extending above. Near the gates, workers stood in knots, muttering to each other and looking anxiously toward the structure. Then Sophie showed up, hard helmet shining in the spring sun, leading a group of inspectors. When the inspectors entered, Brandon was doing his own press conference inside. Sophie confidently introduced herself, asked to enter the manufacturing floor, and was followed by cameras. For a brief period, Brandon's flawless exterior faltered, but it was sufficient. The flash of panic in his eyes was captured on camera. I tightened my fists at my sides and watched it all on television back home. From the ground, Emily sent updates via SMS. I received a note from Robert. They are currently retrieving safety records. Brandon is going crazy. I gave myself permission to grin briefly and bitterly for the first time. But Liam's message was what finally got to me. My phone buzzed once more as the sun was sinking behind the roofs. You were just proclaimed the hero on the news. With my phone in hand and the sounds of the evening news coming from the living room, I perched on the edge of my bed. There was still a long way to go. Damage control investigations and lawsuits, but for the first time since that terrible Friday, I sensed a change in the earth. My phone flashed with a message from Liam as Brandon's self-assured smile wavered. They just announced you on the news as the hero. I realized that the people, not the machines, had always been the center of this place as I stood on the factory floor once more. Half of Maple Forge steel had been shut down by Sophie's inspection team 3 weeks prior. The once loud plant was now silent, only sometimes disturbed by the clang of tools while workers replaced guards, adjusted machinery, and restored what had been damaged by carelessness. Sturdy and shiny, I ran my hand over the new safety shield as I walked the entire length of Line 3. Standing here as the recently hired Director of Operational Safety and Compliance, rather than a manager rushing to meet production targets, was odd. The day after the board decided to fire Brandon Mercer for cause, Greg Winters, the son of the company's retired founder, flew in from Toronto and visited me in his father's former office. He shook my hand firmly and said bluntly, "Martin, I want you to help rebuild this place. The trust, not just the robots." Now, while I was moving through the facility, I noticed Emily going over invoices with a small financial team and Robert examining a control panel. When they noticed me, they both looked up. Emily nodded with the steady serenity that had carried us through the worst. Robert smiled, exhausted but sincere. Liam O'Connor was standing next to a workstation at the far end of the floor, his left sleeve neatly pinned at the elbow where his arm had been. He was grinning as he spoke casually with 2 of the younger employees. Liam was doing well in physical rehabilitation and had expressed a desire to rejoin the new safety training program. Not the press line, I reminded myself to have a formal conversation with him about it. That afternoon, Greg Winters set up a small stage in the center of the shop floor and held a meeting for the entire company. Workers clustered together, eyes alert, voices hushed. They were drawn here not only by curiosity, but also by the first glimmer of optimism, which had been absent for months. Greg took his place at the microphone. He started by saying, "A lot of you recall the days when Maple Forge Steel was more than just a name. You recall the time when it was a symbol of skill, dependability, and caring for its citizens. We lost that sometime along the road. We start reclaiming it today." He made significant announcements, including mandatory equipment checks, a worker-led safety council with actual authority, a new bonus structure linked to both safety and production, and higher maintenance expenditures. The board unanimously decided to fire Brandon Mercer for cause this morning. He said, his voice growing firmer. Additionally, we are completely assisting the district attorney and the Ministry of Labor in their inquiry into his actions. The crowd reacted with a mixture of relief and incredulity. In the rear, I attracted Liam's attention. He nodded steadily and slightly as if to say, "You fulfilled your commitment." Greg wasn't done yet. Lastly, the Director of Operational Safety and Compliance will be a new leadership position. This individual will report directly to the board and will have the power to stop production if safety is jeopardized. Martin Gallagher has consented to assume this position with immediate effect. The room held their breath for a heartbeat before the applause began. Not the courteous, dispersed applause of a business function, but the unfiltered, appreciative type that comes from those who have been waiting for someone to take the stage. My voice was scratchy with passion as I stepped up to the microphone, my heart pounding. "Safety isn't a line item from now on," I declared as I steadied myself on the podium. "It serves as our cornerstone. No more taking short ways, remaining silent, or ignoring problems." Liam walked over as the crowd began to thin out. With a broad, easy smile, he said, "I guess you're stuck with me now, boss." I returned the smile. "Liam, you have a lot of work ahead of you. I also have a lot to learn from you." 3 months later, I was outside the courthouse, watching Brandon Mercer come out with his attorneys at his side, his face defiant but pallid. Charges of criminal negligence and fabricating safety records had been brought by the district attorney. I was not required to be present. However, there was a part of me that wanted to finish this lengthy journey. Across the courthouse steps, Brandon's eyes locked with mine. Something like a smirk twisted his mouth. "Are you happy now, Martin?" As he went by, he mumbled. Calmly, I looked him in the eye. "No, but when you are held responsible, I will be." He gave a little giggle, but as he turned to leave, his shoulders drooped a little. I went to Liam's flat that weekend. We saw the light catch on Hamilton's rooftops while enjoying iced tea on the balcony in the late afternoon sun. "You know, you could have just walked away," Liam remarked softly. "Find a new job." I thought as I carefully rotated the glass in my palms, "Liam, some things are more important than a paycheck. You have two options when you notice something amiss: ignore it or take action." Liam gave a slow nod. "Well, I'm happy you took action." That night, the city lights turned into a soft sheen as I drove home. The tightness in my chest subsided for the first time in months. The machinery at Maple Forge would restart, but they would do it correctly this time. And I was aware that we had this second chance because I stood my ground, even if it meant leaving first. Standing up after being knocked down, facing a system that is against you, and knowing that you didn't give up is an experience that will never be forgotten. As I reflect on my experience at Maple Forge, I see that it's not just my tale. It tells the tale of innumerable employees, supervisors, and regular citizens who have experienced injustice and had to choose between speaking out or resisting. To anyone experiencing something similar, realize that courage is just as important as patience. Making the right choice can occasionally require sacrifice, but perseverance and strategy can change the course of events. Never undervalue the strength of silent perseverance or the friends you make along the way. We appreciate you watching and listening. I'd love to hear your opinions or your own stories. So please type 1 or leave a comment below if this story touched you. Remember to subscribe for more true tales of justice and resiliency. Please feel free to share this video with anyone you know who could use a little motivation today. We develop, learn, and remind one another that we're never really alone while we're together.